Hi, everybody back home and everybody here, and welcome to the first official full week of EN140, Rhetoric and Critical Thinking. This week, we're going to start exploring some of the concepts of rhetoric that we're going to dive a little bit more in depth with. You have one assignment this week that is due on Sunday, and we have a couple of PowerPoints that we're going to start going over to start unpacking this idea of what is rhetoric, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I guess I better start off with the actual assignment, and then the PowerPoints that we're going to talk about will help you with said assignment. So let me click my share screen and make sure I have the assignment up. Yes, I do. And let me pull this over here because this is great YouTubing, and hit share screen. And we're going to be sharing the reading to believe, reading to doubt thing. So here's your assignment that we will be doing. Is reading to believe, reading to doubt. Read the article in your textbook on page 785. On the piece of paper I'm going to pass out to the people in class here at the end of class, it was originally a different page, but the new textbook has switched up what page it appears on. If you are not in class for any particular reason, I have made a copy of it and I'm going to upload it to Google Classroom. So even those of you who have your textbooks, y'all can just use the PDF I upload on Classroom along with the assignment to help you out with this. But what you're going to be doing is reading to believe and reading to doubt. It is the first step in really helping unlocking your rhetorician abilities. If you can do this, you can pretty much learn anything. Like I've always been saying, like reading and writing is the key to being able to learn anything. And this is a very important step towards it. So basically, I'll go much more in depth with this during the second PowerPoint that we're going to be covering today. But what you just need to know is, first, I want you to write does/says statements for each of the paragraphs in the article. Remember, at this point, you're reading to believe. So you're believing everything that they're saying. That means you don't argue with them or support them. You just accept what they're saying and explain what the purpose of that paragraph serves in the argument, what it does, and summarize the paragraph in 1 or 2 sentences, what it says. If that sounds confusing, like I said, the PowerPoint that I'm going to be going over will explain it much more in depth. But the first time you're going to read through the entire article and you're going to say, this is what the paragraph is saying. You're going to summarize it in just a sentence. And then you're going to tell me what this paragraph is doing in sense for the argument. Second, I want you to reread the article again. So the first time you're going to read it like you believe it. The next time you're going to read it to doubt it. Second, I want you to reread the article and come up with a list of at least 3 points of doubt for the article. 3 things that you don't think are strong enough in the article. What things seem to be questionable in the article? Does it lack any of the points lack sufficient support to overcome skepticism? Are there places that rely on faulty reasoning, aka fallacies? These are the sorts of things that you'll be looking for at this point. Make sure to identify not only what you are doubtful of, but also why you have those doubts. So basically, you're going to read it through one time, believing everything they're saying, here's what the paragraph says, here's what it's doing for the argument. Second time, you're going to read it, and you're like, here's where I'm kind of skeptical. Here's where their argument kind of falls short for me, and explain why it was not good. So you need to have 3 points of doubt and a does says statement for each of the paragraphs in the article. I think there's a grand total of like 7 paragraphs, so it's not too much that you're going to be doing with that. But that is the assignment. As I mentioned, I will be going over a PowerPoint that will be much more in depth about what this assignment has to say. Speaking of fallacies, fallacies are faulty reasonings, faulty points, faulty claims that people try to float as legitimate reasons to support their argument. You had that assignment last week. I'm working my way through those. If it wasn't for the fact that everything's on fire, I would have probably got those graded this morning, but instead I had to record videos for other classes because fire everywhere. It's fine. I'm the dog with the hat. Let us continue, though. Let's talk about the PowerPoints. Let's actually go over the PowerPoints that we'll be looking at. So I'm going to go ahead, and I wonder how this will work. So I'm going to click share this keynote right here. And I wonder if I present it, it would then do it. So play. There we go. All right. It seems to be working. Your sharing has been paused. You gotta be kidding me. All right, so let's stop the share. Stop that. Oh, fun. Let's move over here. And we'll go with this. All right, I'm going to share this again. Sorry for the technical difficulties. I guess I could just share my desktop. Would sharing my desktop fix this issue? There we go. All right. So context is what we're going to start with. We're going to be talking about rhetorical context. I've been having the sophomores kind of do baby's first steps towards rhetorical context, but we're going to dive a little bit more in depth right here, right now. So take notes as you digest it. Remember, notes or annotations, just your thoughts as you interact with material. Taking notes help you actually learn these concepts a little bit better. So context. Context is making sure that you match not just what you're writing, but also your content, the support of your argument, etc., to your audience. So making sure everything connects back to your audience. You're at the stage now in your writing careers, the audience becomes a major player in this. You need to consider the audience. And most of the time, the audience is just me, the professor or the instructor. I'm not a professor. I don't have that many fancy degrees, but it's usually just me, the instructor, and your classmates. But in a general sense, you are talking about general audience, and we'll talk about what general audiences are more in depth here in a second. The example we're going to be looking at, in fact, here's an example of when context comes into play. So there's an editorial that is about illegal immigration written by a Catholic priest and published in a magazine aimed at Catholics. So this is our example. So it's an editorial about immigration written by a Catholic priest published in a magazine aimed at Catholics. In this case, there was a Catholic priest as for the author, and he was writing for a Catholic audience. So he referenced Bible scriptures and opinions of various groups of Catholic priests on the issue. This worked because he knew his audience shared those same values and beliefs and would accept the biblical evidence and teachings as support for the argument. Imagine, however, that he was writing this to a general audience and not a Catholic one. As you are writing your essays for this class for a general audience, would this argument still work? For some people, yes, this argument would still work, but for an audience as a whole, no, it would not work. People who didn't share his religious views would find his reasons and support lacking, which would then cause the whole argument to fail. Just to be clear, this does not mean that you should never argue with a religious foundation for your argument, nor does it mean that religious support is inherently weaker than other types of support. It's all about the context in which you're using it in. For the purposes of this class, you'll be addressing a general audience, which rules out using religious support if you want your argument to be effective with your audience, since the audience will be made up of people with a wide variety of different religious viewpoints. In everyday life, you may very well find yourself in situations where the sort of evidence and support that would be perfectly fine depending on your purpose, your own beliefs, and those of your audience. So it comes down to these 5 things. What is the evidence and the support that you're using needs to fit the purpose and the audience, the purpose, your beliefs, and the audience. Those are the things that need to come into line and you need to think about before you use specific evidence and support. You will often find yourself in positions where you are arguing with people who you don't share your beliefs. Further supporting that argument, with evidence that they don't believe in isn't going to get anybody anywhere. So if the audience does not believe what you're trying to tell them, they're not going to listen to the evidence. You need to make sure you suit the evidence and present it in a way that will kind of meet a halfway bridge. And that's what we're going to be talking about when it comes to dialectic thinking here later on. The point is that you just need to understand the context of your argument before you even start writing. So you need to understand these certain concepts. What is my topic? Who am I writing to? And what's the purpose of me writing this? Why am I writing this for this audience? This is where we get into the elements that kind of fit in with this week's assignment with belief and skepticism, because the assignment I'm asking you to do is reading to believe and reading to doubt, reading as a believer, reading as a skeptic. It's important to consider things from multiple viewpoints, reaching a compromise when necessary. This is where the ability to read to believe and read to doubt come into play. Think about any time that you've seen someone on social media post something that was obviously written by some quack or has been widely debunked, but they take it as true. Or maybe they shared an article from a satire website, oblivious to the fact that it was satire, a joke. These people were too quick to believe. And we see this rampant in today's society of people who are too quick to believe. They read something and they automatically believe it. They do not come at it with any healthy skepticism. Now, as we continue into extreme belief in skepticism, if you just take someone's word for what they're saying, you'll be misled very frequently. Unchecked skepticism, however, leads to cynicism, which is just as problematic as believing too quickly. If you go too far with skepticism, you'll end up with a cynical attitude. You aren't even willing to be convinced, no matter how well the idea is supported. You'll probably be overly critical when looking at points of doubt. So you don't want to believe everything too quickly. Like believing everything too quickly, people will lie to you and lead you astray. That's part of the reason why we find ourselves with this problem with fake news and all that stuff that we live in today. But you also do not need to be a skeptic. You do not need to be super skeptical to the point where you're cynical. You don't believe anything. You're just a stick in the mud. You're Oscar the Grouch, and you just are overly critical at anything that anybody tries to point out. You need to have a healthy belief in skepticism. This empathy that comes from the believing part of things is important to keep the cynicism in check. Approaching everything with a healthy skepticism means asking questions, approaching things from the perspective of the doubter. You are still willing to believe, but you need to make sure you should believe it first. So you need to make sure you ask questions as you're interacting with it. You ask yourself, is this believable? Is this truth? Or is this just something that's trying to hit a nerve with me to try to get me to believe that it is? Are they abusing pathos, which we'll talk about that here momentarily with the next slideshow? Are they abusing pathos just to make me believe them, or do they actually have sound logic? Now, believing and doubting game, it's largely a two-step process. And what I'm asking you to do with this assignment this week is the believing and doubting game. It's this two-step process. So the first step of this process is you read the text, or you listen to it, or watch the audio or visual text from the point of view of someone who is going to accept what they're told. So you accept everything that they're told. Along the way, you create these does/says statements for each paragraph in the argument. This is what I'm asking you to do for the assignment this week, is these does/says statements. P.S. What I'm about to cover with you, I'm going to give you like the first two does/says statements for the assignment. A does/says statement identifies what the role of each section of the argument is, what it does, and gives a brief 1 or 2 sentence summary of the paragraph, what it says. So you kind of summarize, here's what this paragraph is saying, and then you say, here's what this paragraph is doing. So you could say this paragraph is trying to introduce the argument. This paragraph is trying to introduce the topic. The paragraph is trying to manipulate our emotions to feeling this way. This paragraph is providing statistics to help with this. This paragraph is closing the argument. This paragraph is trying to build its credibility, the author's credibility. Those types of things are the does things we're looking for in does/says statements. Where it says, it's just you summarize what the paragraph had to say. Here's an example. For the first 2 paragraphs, it says 731, but it's actually, I think, whatever I told you, it's correct on the actual assignment. So the very first paragraph of the textbook example it introduces the topic and gets the reader's attention. It says, a player in an MMO RuneScape stole virtual items. Paragraph 2, what does it do? It provides background information to give context to the discussion. It says, in the Netherlands, the Supreme Court ruled that a player of RuneScape was guilty of theft for stealing virtual items from another player, as victims' time investment to acquire the items give them value despite them being intangible items. And then you'll just continue to go on and on doing, here's what the paragraph is doing, here's what the paragraph is saying. Doing this allows you to empathize with the arguer. You can look at what they are saying without arguing against them. You can see why they do the things they do within the structure of the argument. Then the next step of this is you go back and reread the article as a doubter, a skeptic. What places do it seem the weakest? What questions are you left with? What does the author not include, etc.? These types of questions. These are known as points of doubt. How many you're able to come up with for a given argument will largely depend on the individual argument, but you should be able to come up with something, even for a well-crafted argument. Remember, you're being a skeptic, not a cynical. So don't come up with wild accusations or absurd questions just for the sake of disagreement. Remember, for the assignment, I'm looking for you to come up with 3 points of doubt. Once you're done, you should have a pretty good handle on the whole argument on the argument as a whole. So after you've done the reading to believe, reading to doubt, you'll have a better idea of what this argument is trying to say, which brings us to this dialectic thinking. Dialectic thinking is a philosophical basis for this whole doubting and believing thing. Dialectic thinking has 3 elements. You have thesis, you have theses, antitheses, and synthesis. A thesis is ideas, antithesis is opposing ideas, and synthesis are bringing ideas together. So in theory, every idea thesis generates antithesis, opposing ideas. Theses bring these various ideas together, and synthesis is our overall goal in writing. Synthesis can only be done if you're able to step outside of your own beliefs and look at the relevant points, including your own. You must examine these viewpoints with both acceptance and skepticism to see where the various stances are coming from, what weaknesses they have, and how you may be able to get them to work together. You can then take the ideas from the various stances and put them together into a new idea that is more likely to get support from the various stances. So basically, you're taking the 2 ideas, the thesis and the antithesis, you're going to synthesize it to get an even better idea that will help push society forward. All right, so that was the first PowerPoint that I'm going to be sharing with you. I'm going to delete that real fast, not delete it, but I'm going to exit out of that real fast. And we're going to cover the other one real fast as well, okay, which is classical rhetoric. So I need to, once again, share my screen. So share. This is so engrossing. Where's my desktop one? There's my desktop one. All right, classical rhetoric, because that's the name of the class. And in this one, I'll actually kind of explain to you how some of the things we did in 100 come into play here in 140. So what is rhetoric? Rhetoric is the art of influencing the thought and conduct of your audience. So you're trying to influence your audience. You're trying to influence what they think and how they act. You're convincing the audience that your ideas have merit. Now, also this right here, what I'm going to cover with you, next week or later on this week, I'll have some information for you that will go much more in depth. But your very, very first essay that you'll be writing in this class, the rhetorical analysis, rhetoric, your rhetorical analysis covers this material that we are going to be talking about, specifically the parts of classical rhetoric: Cryos, Ethos, Pathos, and Logos. In fact, in your very first essay, you're going to be reading an argument and telling me why that argument has Cryos, how the argument builds Ethos, how it builds Pathos, and how it builds Logos. So, Cryos. Cryos is an element of rhetorical context. How well does your argument fit in with the moment? Is it something that people will be talking about right now? Is it relevant to the moment? If so, you're hitting the cryotic moment. If not, you're either missing your window or to talk about it, or you're too early. Either way, people won't pay attention to what you're talking about. So basically, cryos is basically the timeliness of the argument. Is the argument worth our time at this particular time? The example I always go back to is like buggy whips that people use when they whip their horses on a buggy. About 100 years ago, there was laws on how long your buggy whip could be. Was that cryotic then? Yes, for 100 years ago, that was a acceptable time. But now, do we really have horse and buggies? No. So having arguments over how long the horse and buggy whip should be is not necessarily a timely argument. It is something that is not relevant to the general audience. It's missed its cryotic moment. Then we move on to ethos. You probably have heard, I've talked to you all about ethos, pathos, and logos before. Ethos is your character, your credibility. If you provide your audience with information that shows them that you're credible to talk about the subject, or that you share their values and beliefs, i.e. you have upstanding character in their eyes, you're appealing to ethos. So ethos is appealing to your credibility. How can the audience trust you? How does the audience think that you are credible? And there's various ways that you can do this. To establish your own credibility, you could provide some sort of credentials, like you could talk about your academic, your professional credentials that you have, etc. So I could, like, if I was to be writing about something that dealt with like restaurants, I could talk about my credentials of working in restaurants through high school and college, and I could talk about the different restaurants I've worked with. That would help build my credibility when it comes to talking about the restaurant industry. You could also show personal experience that is relevant to the topic. So you could, so if I was to be writing about like children, I could share my own personal experience of being a father. And you could also establish your character. To establish your character, you need to show fairness towards the other viewpoints, demonstrate concern over the issues of concern for your audience, etc. So another way that we establish credibility is showing a fair shake to the other side, showing fairness to the other side. Different ways to apply ethos. You also can use ethos to establish character. You need to show fairness towards other viewpoints and demonstrate a concern over issues that are concerned with your audience. Now, there's also this thing called ethos by association. This is something a lot of you would probably utilize once you actually start writing your arguments with the second or the third essay we're going to be doing this semester. But ethos by association is where you lack personal ethos on the topic, so you bring in other people who have it. For instance, if you aren't an expert, but you cite experts, you're using their ethos as to enhance yours. Also also consider when you see political ads in which an everyday person, typically a bull-collared worker of some sort, says that he supports candidate X. Politicians typically aren't known for being in touch with the average people, so they find someone who represents that group to endorse them. The implication is that if that person supports that candidate, the candidate must care about the issues those kinds of people care about in general. Now let's talk about pathos. Pathos is the sexy appeal. It's the sizzling appeal that everybody loves and everybody abuses. They beat pathos like a dead horse. Anytime you give the audience something to connect with that makes them feel a certain way. If you don't make your reader care about your argument, you won't be able to convince them to do anything about it. Pathos deals 100% with emotion. You're trying to manipulate the audience to feel a certain way. You're trying to make them angry. You're trying to make them sad. You're trying to make them empathetic. If you're appealing to anything with emotion, that is pathos. Things to consider when using pathos. You must make sure that you do not manipulate your audiences emotionally. This is the problem we're having with the internet, is that they tap into your emotions in order for them to peddle that false belief, that fake news and stuff that allow you to believe too quickly. You also don't need to mislead them by making them feel something in the absence of real evidence. Once again, that's the internet thing. You don't have real evidence, but you're making them feel a certain way. Now, the trump card to all this, the big rock that kind of sinks everything. You can have all the credibility you have in the world. You can have all the pathos in the world. The thing that kind of rules the roost is logos. But the problem is logos isn't as easy to build, and logos isn't as sexy as pathos. But logos is the kind of counterpoint to pathos. Logos isn't about making your readers care about the issue. It's there to provide factual evidence and logical support to the argument. Logos is incredibly powerful due to the fact of the strength of logic and facts. It's hard to refute something that is factual. So logos is the truth, basically. Here's these facts, here's this information that I have that I can put down that shows that this is actually occurring, that this is true, that helps bring down everything else. If you do not have any logos, your argument is very, very faulty. It is a house of cards, but if you have logos, you have a firm foundation. Now, once again, the downside of logos is there's nothing to care about for your readers to care about. They call them cold hard facts for a reason. They're strong, but there's nothing warm and fuzzy about them. It doesn't make them feel. Now, in reality, you're going to combine these appeal types. It's common for a single thing to be multiple types of appeal. Most ethos appeals are paired with logos, credential, or pathos, personal experience. This leads many people to having a difficult time identifying ethos since it is hidden behind the other two, but is actually both. Just remember that this is entirely possible and actually pretty common for a single part of an argument to fulfill multiple roles, even for a bit, maybe even if a bit of the three type appeals in one single example. All right, so I'm going to exit out of that. Once again, both things that we talked about today in the PowerPoints can apply to the assignment that you'll be doing here today. In fact, I'm going to stop sharing this and I'm going to return to sharing this. The assignment is due Sunday. And with this assignment, once again, I'm asking you to read to believe, read to doubt. You're going to read the article in your textbook on page 785 and use it as the foundation for believing and doubting. First, I want you to write the does/says statements. The does statements, those are rhetorical appeal types. So is it appealing to logos? Is it appealing to pathos? Is it appealing to ethos? Is it appealing to cryos? Those can be does statements. Then the says statements is here's what it's actually saying. And also remember at the very end, you need to come up with at least 3 pieces of doubt that you can work with. As mentioned before, this is due on Sunday. You have the rest of the week to work on it. Both of the appeal types and the reading to believing to doubt are what will help you with this. The assignment will be a PDF of the article will be attached to the assignment in Classroom, but if you have your textbooks, you can go ahead and use those to access it. That's all I have for you right now. If you have any questions, please email me, pdavidson@portagel.k12.mus, and I'll see you virtual people, and I guess you who are in front of me that decide to come back and rewatch this just for S&Gs later. Bye-bye.